I'll set you going whenever you're ready.
Okay. Welcome again to another episode of Town Hall. I'm here with the man that you guys all know, Mr. Steve Schewel, City Councilman Schewel, Coach Schewel. And today we actually have a special guest, another Steve, that has played an important role in my life, I would say, mostly my jump shot mechanics, Mr. Steve Unruh. Thanks for joining us.
Pleasure to be here.
Being here. We're going to talk, try and cover as much as we can today about education. Both these gentlemen have served time in the classroom, on the school board, so they're very familiar with the landscape. And I'm hoping just to get one thing, learn one thing out of this, if not a couple more with their deep knowledge that they provide. So I don't know if you guys have a topic. You know, education is a very broad thing. If there's something that you guys want to jump into first, you're the special guest here.
I'll start us off with a question for you, Mr. Unruh.
Yeah, please.
So here we are at Whitted School, J.A. Whitted. You can see it behind us. And Justin and I were here kind of on the other side of the school last time we did a town hall. And we were talking about housing. And of course, Whitted is senior housing. It's affordable housing for seniors. But there's also a pre-K here. So that's kind of a big deal. Do you want to talk to us about it?
Sure. I think, first of all, it's a great, beautiful facility that the county and the city and the school system have worked to rehab. And the point of pre-K is that we really need students, children, ready for school. Pre-K is how we're going to have to do that. We really need all of our kids in pre-K of some sort. And Whitted is kind of a down payment on making that happen in Durham. And for us, the chance to do it at a facility like this is just tremendous. So it'll serve this neighborhood and the families in this neighborhood, and it'll provide high quality pre-K, 3-year-olds, 4-year-olds, have them coming to school ready for kindergarten, and from kindergarten, probably college within a couple of years.
Yeah, early childhood development is such an important part of that education pipeline. Being able to provide as many resources for students as soon as they, even before they can read, you know, it's really about getting their education started early. So having the pre-K center here, do you know about how many students it will serve in the community?
The number that sticks in my head is 144.
Okay.
That could be completely wrong, but it's somewhere in the vicinity. It's over 100, and it's a number of classrooms. I invite members of the community to come by and look because it's gorgeous. The building is gorgeous.
It is great that they were able to renovate as opposed to having to demolish and put something new here. Durham has overall done a pretty good job of that, being able to take the old and build something new for the type of city that we want to see in the future. So it's a great introductory question.
And I think just kind of to follow up on that, we talk about education as if we're talking about kids in classrooms with a teacher standing in front of them, but it's so much more than that. And pre-K kind of shows that because for a kid to learn, they got to be able to eat, they have to have health care, they need social services, and we're working to try to provide what we call an envelope or wraparound services throughout the Durham schools so that our children can learn because they're ready to learn because their other needs are getting met.
Yeah. There's something that's been sticking on my mind recently. We actually did a story on charter schools for The Voice over at North Carolina Central, and one of the schools that came up pretty often was Kestrel Heights, one of the charter schools here in town that has had an interesting last couple of years, to say the least. They had some issues with the credentials that the students were getting, whether or not students were actually qualifying for graduation. And with that, the idea of, or the the idea of charter schools and whether or not we should push for them continues to be part of the conversation when it comes to education. So if you could give our audience a 30-second to minute pitch on just what charter schools are and how they differ a little bit from obviously the public school system.
All right. Well, in 30 seconds, a charter school is a publicly funded private school. Families.
That's a little contradictory, is it?
It is, but the publicly funded, the dollars come from our tax dollars.
Mm-hmm.
It comes from state money and local money, just like the public school system. The private part being that the administration for the school is private to that school. People create the charter school. The board that creates it runs it, and so in that sense, there's no accountability from that school out to the public. So that's the private part of it.
Mm-hmm. And again, using Kestrel Heights as an example here, how then do you hold these charter schools accountable as a system or even just as a community to make sure that the students there are getting the education that they need with the lack of oversight from the public school system?
Well, that's the challenge.
Right.
I think when we talk about charter schools, it's really important to distinguish the viewpoint from a parent
Mm-hmm.
and the viewpoint from the public, from government. So trying to, from a government accountability standpoint, charters are a challenge because there really aren't good mechanisms for holding them accountable, for really understanding what they're doing, for measuring how students are doing, for tracking the performance. And so Kestrel is a great example of a school that kind of drifted
Mm-hmm.
and finally got in trouble, but it took a long time to locate a problem that would have been found very quickly, I think, in a regular public school. The flip side of that is if you're a parent, a charter school is just another school.
Sure.
And so you're looking at that school with really the same eyes you look at any other school. Is it close by? Do the hours work well? Do I like the size of it? Do I like the teachers that I see? And so parents think of a charter school and a public school as just a whole set of schools. I'm going to see which one works for me.
Mm-hmm.
Those of us on the government side need to think of it as, so how can we run this complex system of publicly accountable schools and then private schools that we fund but don't really have a means to hold accountable?
Mm-hmm.
How do we make those work together?
Right.
And that's not at all clear at this point.
Is the accountability, you think, the biggest issue that people that are against charter schools have with the idea? Again, school choice sounds like something that most of us want. When we go off to university, we all, we send in our applications, we look at a ton of schools, we use those same metrics, proximity, the professors, so all these other things that we take into account. So why is it different for that K through 12 education where there's so much pushback?
Well, I think the issue, accountability is a word that represents a big array of challenges. So we think of accountability often as just test scores, are students doing well?
Right.
But really, it's, do they accept students with disabilities? Do they accept poor students? Do they have mechanisms to work with those poor students to help them? Do they
ESL students?
Do they accept ESL students? Do they have ways of working with those students? And
Do they provide lunch? Do they provide a hot lunch? Do they provide bus service to get students to school?
right, because if you don't do that, then by default you're ruling out poor students who are going to choose where they can get transportation, where they can get food. So until we come up with mechanisms that really bring charter schools into the public school accountability system so that we can work with charter schools and the public schools on that whole array of issues of serving the entire community, it's going to be a difficult challenge.
And it sort of seems like it's going the other way. That is to say, Justin mentioned, I think we were talking beforehand, that the new Secretary of Education of the United States is a big charter proponent and is really trying to push in that direction, as well as school vouchers and that kind of thing. So, do you have any predictions?
Well, I think that there's the surface wave, which is the state and national politics, which I think is going in a terrible direction, away from accountability, away from cooperation. But I think beneath the surface of that, what I'm sensing in the people that run charter schools that are now have been around long enough to kind of mature and be more invested in the community is a sense of wanting to work with the school system, wanting to develop some mechanisms by which there's cooperation and a greater sense of let's talk about how we can work together, how we can serve all of the students in the community. So I'm, on the local sense, I'm actually hopeful that we're moving in a different direction. I try to pay as little attention as possible to
You're a wise
national
man.
politics.
Very wise. I have another question for you, Steve, that sort of just, going back to this, where we started with the pre-K. So you were a teacher at Riverside for
24 years,
24 years before you got on the school board.
3 of which I suffered through Justin Laidlaw.
You had him for 3 different years?
I think that's right, didn't I?
I think it was just one.
Was it
I think
just
you
one?
got off easy.
Felt
I
like
think it was
three.
just
Felt
one.
like 3. Well, we'll count the 2 where you came back.
And 1 year with Justin equals 3 years with anybody else. I get it.
They call them Laidlaw years.
Yeah.
Yes.
The
Right.
lo- the
Very
lo-
familiar
the
with
lost
those.
years.
Yeah.
Well, anyway, so you had Justin, and you were a teacher for 24 years.
24 years at Riverside, 5 years at Northern.
Okay. And then, so, thinking about just as a, going back to the pre-K, because I know that's a big issue that's on the table for our county and our whole community now, which is the idea of universal pre-K, that we could start bringing everybody, even people that couldn't afford it on their own privately, into a pre-K system that would get them ready for school earlier. So how are we doing on that, and what are the prospects?
Well, I'm very hopeful. We've had the county sponsored a task force that had school system, had the pre-K community, had the county and social services together. They have a plan. The county has committed to that plan to dramatically expand the pre-K choices available in Durham, starting with 4-year-olds. I think we'll see a quantum leap forward in the next 4 or 5 years.
Right.
And then I think the step after that will be 3-year-olds. But I think the commitment's there. I think the public in Durham wants to see this, understands the need for it, and I think as we get it in place, it'll be one more thing that makes Durham an attractive place for families.
We're going to take a quick break. We'll come back for part 2 in a second, so stay tuned.